I shouldn't have gone there. It's all so clear now, sitting here in this dim room with my pen trembling in my hand. The warnings were subtle, the kind you dismiss as village superstition. But Black Hollow? It was more than a house. It was a predator. When I inherited the house, I was indifferent. Uncle Silas had died under peculiar circumstances, or so I was told. A stroke, they said, though the whispered conversations of my distant relatives suggested otherwise. No one had been inside Black Hollow since the police left, and they only went in reluctantly. It had been sitting empty for nearly a year, brooding under a canopy of gnarled oaks at the edge of town. I was in need of a fresh start, and an old Gothic mansion seemed as good a place as any. The idea of selling it crossed my mind, but curiosity trumped practicality. Uncle Silas and I hadn't been close, but the stories he sent when I was a child still lingered in my mind. Tales of things glimpsed in mirrors, strange noises in the attic, and the woman on the stairs. I arrived on a windy afternoon in October. The air was cold and heavy with the smell of wet leaves. Black Hollow loomed like a sentinel over the barren landscape, its dark stone walls streaked with moss and its windows like blind eyes. The front gate creaked when I pushed it open, and the gravel path crunched beneath my boots as I approached the front door. The key turned reluctantly in the lock, and when I stepped inside, the scent of mildew and something sour struck me. Dust coated every surface, and cobwebs hung from the rafters like ghostly veils. The air was unnaturally cold, colder than it should have been for an autumn day. I dropped my bag in the grand foyer and surveyed the house. High ceilings and intricate woodwork gave it a regal, if decayed, charm. The chandelier above was festooned with dead insects, and the wallpaper was peeling in long, curling strips. I told myself it was just a house, old and neglected, nothing more. But then the footsteps began. The first night, I heard them in the hallway. Slow, deliberate steps that echoed far too loud in the silence. I bolted upright in bed, my heart hammering. "Hello!" I called out, my voice cracking. The steps stopped. I waited, clutching the quilt to my chest, straining to hear anything else. Nothing. I convinced myself it was just the house settling, the creak of old wood expanding and contracting. The second night, I wasn't so sure. I was unpacking in the study, a small room lined with empty bookshelves and a desk piled with Uncle Silas's old papers. A faint rustling sound came from the corner of the room, like fabric brushing against wood. I turned quickly, expecting to see what. I wasn't sure. But there was nothing. Just shadows. That night, the footsteps returned, louder this time, and they didn't stop at the hallway. They came to my bedroom door. I froze, the weight of the silence pressing on me like a physical force. I thought I saw the doorknob move. Just a flicker, a twitch. I held my breath. When morning came, I told myself I had dreamed it. By the end of the week, I knew I wasn't alone. It wasn't just the footsteps or the rustling sounds. It was the cold spots that followed me from room to room, the faint whispering I heard when I was half asleep, the way objects seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. I'd leave my keys on the kitchen table and find them upstairs on the dresser. Doors I knew I had closed would be standing ajar. And then there were the mirrors. I avoided them after the third day. Every time I passed one, I thought I saw movement just at the edge of the glass. A shadow that didn't match mine, a face that wasn't mine. I covered them with sheets, but it didn't help. The sense of being watched grew stronger, oppressive. It was as though the house itself was alive, observing me, waiting for something. One night, while going through Uncle Silas's papers, I found his journal. The entries were sporadic and became increasingly erratic toward the end. He wrote about the house, how it seemed to breathe, how he would wake up to find muddy footprints on the floor leading to his bed. How he saw the woman. "The woman on the stairs," he had written in a shaky hand. "She watches me, always just out of reach, always just behind me, her eyes God, her eyes. I couldn't sleep after reading that. The next evening, I saw her. I was in the library, or what was left of it. The fireplace hadn't worked in years, and a faint light from my lantern cast long, flickering shadows. I'd been hearing the footsteps again, pacing above me, but I was too tired to care. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw movement. At the far end of the room, just beyond the edge of the light, stood a woman. Her dress was old-fashioned, tattered and stained, and her hair hung in damp, matted clumps. She didn't move, didn't speak. She just stared at me with eyes that were impossibly black. I don't remember screaming, but I must have. When I came to, I was on the floor, the lantern shattered beside me. She was gone. I left that night, or tried to. The car wouldn't start and my phone had no signal. I ran down the driveway, but the forest seemed to close in around me, the gnarled branches clawing at my clothes. I tripped, fell, and when I looked up, the house was there. I hadn't left. It wouldn't let me. For 3 days, I was trapped. The house grew darker, colder. The shadows deepened, the whispers grew louder, and the woman, she was everywhere. Always just out of reach, always watching. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. I could feel the house pressing in on me, consuming me. On the 4th day, I found the basement. The door had been hidden behind a heavy tapestry in the dining room. The stairs were steep and narrow, and the air smelled of damp earth and rot. At the bottom, I found the altar. A crude thing, made of stone and covered in strange symbols. Bones were scattered around it, and the walls were covered in scratches, as if someone, or something, had tried to claw their way out. And then I heard her voice. A low, guttural whisper that seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You are mine." I don't remember climbing the stairs, but I remember the sound of them splintering beneath me as I fled. I remember the sensation of icy hands grabbing at me, pulling me back. And I remember the laughter, cold, cruel laughter, as I stumbled out into the daylight. I never went back to Black Hollow. I don't know who or what she was, but she's still there, waiting, watching. The house is hers now, as it always was. And I'm just another story it tells.